So I'm very conscious I'm between you and Negroni, your clock, or whatever it is. So I can try and concertina it a little bit. Why don't we do that? Thank you very much for everyone that's come today. I'm incredibly humbled for the opportunity of talking. And as mentioned, I'm very much part of a team, not leading a team, very much part of a team which is CoGenes, and we have some members up the back there, so which is a collaboration for genetic epilepsy and neurogenetics at Sydney Children's Hospital Network. And also I really want to acknowledge that here I'm speaking on the land of the Gadigal and Bidjigal peoples, and I'd like to pay my respect to past, present and future traditional custodians and elders of this nation, and the continuation of cultural, spiritual and educational practices of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. So some guiding words for me. I think one of the themes that's coming up today is how incredibly rare many of the genetic conditions that your children have. And I think we've got a big problem in this country and internationally, that we do not have a level playing field. So we have inequity of access to high quality of care for children with rare diseases. We think about childhood cancer. That's a condition people know, recognize when they get diagnosed. A whole team of people come around. But for families with genetic epilepsies, that's a battle, and that's not right, and that's something that we need to change. And the other thing is that why are days like today so important is because you are the families living with these rare diseases, with genetic epilepsies, and if we don't listen to you and your priorities, then we're really not going to get effective outcomes. And I think the last talk just beautifully illustrated that. So this is our small crew, CoGenes, and this is our small vision is to improve the diagnosis, management and support of children with genetic epilepsies. And here we are, and I just wanted to plug for those of you who are joining online or in person tomorrow, you'll be hearing talks from Erin, Natalie, Suzanne and Eden. So I'm not going to go into huge details about some of the projects we've been doing, but maybe give some broader points and also very welcome for any questions that people have. I think we've talked a lot about this today. You know, this ideal of looking at precision epilepsy is really so we can try and shorten that journey of one drug after another drug. Will it work? Won't it work? And that beautiful analogy of stopping, picking kids out of the river, but going and finding out why they're falling in. And so for many conditions, you know, the reality is we do not have that yet. We do not have precision medicine. This is a group I've been very involved with, and we've got a conference next weekend. And we don't have any treatments for CLCN4 that are targeted, but from speaking to families internationally, we know how important it is that a diagnosis gives that connection that we've heard about today, can help with all of the really important things around allied health, know what it is and what it isn't, get some information about whether it could happen again in our family and some options for that, and really that it's not anyone's fault. You know, how many of us as parents think back, what have we done as parents that have caused our children to behave as well? And what we hear from parents of children with genetic conditions is how much time they think about what it could have been during the pregnancy or something they did or they didn't do. And it is just a mystery. This is no one's fault. This is just something that happens, and if our genetics weren't different, we would all be identical clones of each other. And not to underestimate that power of hope. And this was a quote that Beck, one of our genetic counsellors, shared from a family who said, and I think these are maybe not the precise words, but this after a diagnosis, you gave me 10 minutes of my life back every day, because that was how much time I was thinking about what this could be. And really it's all about choice, because we all have different choices. We're all, whether we want to go into genetic testing or not, and then what we do with that information at the end of the day, this is really something that we as geneticists enter into as a partnership. So it's having that discussion about whether that's helpful for you and whether that would change anything for you right now, and if it's the right time to think about it. And a big change I wanted to highlight is that last year there's new funding come on. So for families where their genetic condition is an inherited genetic condition, there is now Medicare funding for pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, which was never available before. So that's a big step forward. So where do we start with genetic or genomic testing? There's this huge array of words we throw at you, chromosomal microarray, karyotype, exome sequence, whole genome sequencing. And basically, this is the very simple version of it. We're looking at an incredible amount of genetic information. And it's really where we slice that watermelon is how much depth we go into. And so one of the things that I wanted to highlight today is, we've been talking about precision medicine or trials towards precision medicine. But what happens if your child doesn't have a diagnosis? We know that at least half of people who the child has a suspected genetic diagnosis do not have that collection of letters and numbers that's giving them some direction. And maybe that's because you've only had a test that's looked at something a few years back, what we knew. And every week we're describing new genetic causes. So it sounds very fancy. I've been involved with the diagnosis of 9 new genetic conditions. That's not fancy at all, okay? Because every week there's new genetic conditions. So if your test was done a while back, it's really worth connecting in with your genetic service and saying, are there new testing or new ways that we could look at that genetic data to see if we can get an answer? So there's always that hope. So this was my idea of simplifying genetics, is I really rate this website, which is genomicsinfo.org.au, which is really setting the scene that we all are very different from each other in terms of our genetics. Variation is the rule, not the exception, okay? And so the analysis process is this incredibly detailed sifting through millions and millions of genetic variants to try and find an answer. And that is complex and time consuming. And that is why your testing may take 6 months, 1 year, and it frustrates us. Absolutely it does. But that's why this process is so long. But at the end of the day, there's 4 answers. So one, we may give you a collection of letters and numbers. And what does that mean? So a diagnostic answer. We may come back and say the test hasn't found anything, but I want to highlight that doesn't necessarily mean it's not a genetic condition, just that the test wasn't good enough, or our knowledge about the genetic causes of your child's condition may not be good enough. So no, or not yet. Or we find something and we don't know what it means, a variant of uncertain significance, so we're just giving you back more uncertainty, and I'll talk about that a bit. So that's a head scratcher for us. About a third of the time we get a variant of uncertain significance, and many of you will have sat through that or may still be sitting with that. We find something completely unrelated, okay? So this is a really important concept, and why genetics is a conversation about whether that's the right thing for you as a family, because we may find a predisposition to a cancer when we do the genetic test for epilepsy, and it's important that you're aware about that and can make some choices. So these are the sort of things I think through, and we have these discussions with families. And for non-geneticists, and why I sadly couldn't be here for the first talks this morning, because I was trying to teach non-geneticists about genetics, is really that process of how supportive is your specialist in guiding you through this. And really genetic counsellors are the great heroes of the day in terms of taking you through this very complex process. And these are the sort of questions you have a right to be asking when you're going through genetic testing. What is the chance I'll get an answer? How long will it take? How will I get the results back? What does this mean if I have this test? Is there a cost? And what happens? Is there a chance I might find something else? And I really think that we need to change how we're doing medicine so that it's more this partnership, and you come to us with questions and we sit down and we try and address those. Because that's your right, okay? So this is the Australian Healthcare Charter, and you have a right to get information that makes sense to you, okay? And that takes time and a relationship, and that's part of our job. So one of the ways to try and give you information you'll hear is we're part of a team that works on Pediatric Epilepsy Network, and 2 years ago now, actually, we co-designed with families some resources around genetic epilepsy, sort of taking you through some concepts, what to expect. So show that, and also for clinicians as well. So there's two sides to the PEN website. There's information for families, information for clinicians, and they're open to both. Okay. What else? That's that website where there's lots of these infographics. I'm quite a visual person, so I think that's quite helpful. And genetics, the Centre for Genetics Education was relaunched this week, and lots of new information on there as well. So you might like to go into that. But this is Eden, one of our postdocs you'll be hearing from tomorrow. Is you can get all this information, but what you want is knowledge. What will make a difference to you and your family? I think that's where we still have a way to go in making our information more accessible. So you'll hear tomorrow about Gene Compass. Some of you may have already submitted a question to Gene Compass, and the idea was there was a first trial at trying to get understand what questions families have about their child's genetic epilepsy or as yet undiagnosed genetic epilepsy, and what sort of questions people have and how we can try and get information back. And really, I guess, when we still are talking, we're talking about quite health literate information for people who are quite health literate, but we're not at all good at presenting information when English isn't someone's first language and they're from different cultural backgrounds. So, for example, there's a beautiful video that's been made which is for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, which is talking Your Blood, Your Story, and that beautifully explains genetics, I think, without ever mentioning cells and DNA, but the concepts of how things are passed on in families. And I may now manage to break the machine.
It probably won't play.
This way?
Yeah, it might not play.
That's all right. I just wanted to advance the slide. Hang on. I may have fixed it. There we go. And the other thing is, there's often a missing person in the room when we're talking about genetics in terms of involving, which is that your child who may have learning difficulties often would have learning difficulties. So I'm part of an inclusive research group with researchers with intellectual disability, where we're starting to try and understand what people with intellectual disabilities have been experienced of going through genetics, and how we can try and make information more accessible for everyone. So that's that project. I won't go into detail, but one of the things that we're learning is when we give this collection of numbers and names to a gene, how confusing that is. And your GP's never heard of it, and it's so easy to get one letter mixed up, and you could go down a whole rabbit hole. So one of the things we're doing is starting a discussion about the naming of genetic conditions. Can we make it more accessible? And actually, can we include people with the genetic conditions in that naming process? And also wanted to highlight how important it is that we are looking nationally and internationally with rare diseases. So I'm part of this organisation that's a funded project for 3 years looking at rare disease awareness, education, support and training. So we're across Australia, and for example, we're producing some e-learning modules for clinicians about genetics, and really trying to improve a model of care for rare diseases across Australia. So back to those possible outcomes of testing. What do we do if we find an answer? Okay, we find a genetic diagnosis, but your doctor's never heard of it, you've never heard of it. How frustrating is that? And where to go from there? So this is one of the concepts we're trying to work on in Gene Compass is, if you've got an ultra-rare condition, what are the next steps that you can think about? So you guys don't need to know about the importance of joining support groups, and many of you have founded support groups, but also we keep hearing about natural history studies and how important they are, but also that you can register to be alerted if this clinical trial is coming up for your child's condition, which takes some of that power back to you and some pressure off that, looking, hope, and, needing to look through information all the time. And we've talked, obviously, about GETA, and there's other international support groups, and we're trying to put information of that onto our website. And natural history studies are so important for rare diseases. I'm going to skip through all of this because it's quite technical. But why I wanted to go to is that natural history studies are important because it helps us in real time give you information about your child's rare condition, so we can have accurate information and guide healthcare checks. But also they are so important for clinical trial design, so knowing who are the patients around Australia who are ready and interested in clinical trials. this idea of, for ultra-rare diseases, providing historic control data, which is so important. And we've just heard very eloquently helping us know what are the best things that we should be measuring in the clinical trial to make sure that it's actually going to be a useful trial. And what that needs to be a global effort. And I'm going to skip through all of this. So I just also wanted to highlight that this is a new initiative that's starting this year. It's funded for 5 years. You'll see some people you might recognise down there that's involved. And really this is this national effort, but linked to global partners to set up natural history study framework for all genetic epilepsies across Australia and try and connect that data to make it so much more powerful and supportive. This is the little website. If you, I can share the link maybe with you, which is Eden recorded about how you can find out about clinical trials if they come up for your child's condition. I've broken the thing again. Sorry. But I also wanted to just go on to this, the not small number of families who don't have a diagnosis or have an uncertain diagnosis and where to move next. And it's this whole complex array of extra research that can be done to try and drill down and find answers for more families. And we put all of this very complex information together and say this is called an undiagnosed disease program. And it's how we push the limits of our knowledge. So we did that, with various genetic epilepsies here, to get answers, but really this is something we're trying to now do for all of our families. At Sydney Children's Hospital Network we have Gene Start and Gene Add, which are ways of getting into undiagnosed disease programs, and that's a way of tapping into these national and international collaborations and really trying to make us a world leader for rare disease care. Huge new initiative that was launched last week was the Australian Functional Genomics Network, which means that your clinician, if your child's got a variant of uncertain significance, can now apply to this network to try and link with a researcher who could have funding to look into the significance of your child's variant. So a huge new step forward, really exciting. I think I've wrapped up because I can talk quickly, but also just also wanted to give an opportunity if anyone did have any questions, if you've got any energy left after a very long day, then very happy to answer anything.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks very much. Now we do have a few questions for you. You're not off the hook just yet. And maybe a suggestion, start with a suggestion. You had images of dogs in your presentation. Yes. Next time, could we maybe have vodka shots? Okay.
I do have a pandemic puppy, so I am slightly...
I got it. Okay, so the question, we had a question from David. His question was, what have you learnt from crowdsourcing from Gene Compass?
Oh, well, yeah, it's really interesting because it is... here, sorry. And I think this was kind of alluded to before as well, the importance of almost a citizen science methodology here. So traditionally, researchers have done their research and patients and families have been recipients of that research. But it was very, eloquently said earlier, we have been through doing N of 1 clinical trials for our child. We have all this information and data. And I think that we're seeing a shift that we need to be coming to you and seeing if we can collect that data to push forward research for ultra-rare conditions. And what we're finding with Gene Compass up to now, we've only been running it for about 4 months, thank you, Rani, is actually, although the questions aren't exactly the same, there's some really common themes. And one of the commonest themes that's coming up is, my child's got X rare condition, how do I find out about research? So that would be the commonest question. And I actually think this is something we really need to think about as health professionals, because you guys want to know what the reliable, trustworthy sources of information are. And I think we should be doing a better job at helping guide you through that maze.
Okay, we've got a few more questions for you. Whole genome sequencing on Medicare, where are we at with that?
Okay, all right, so the Medicare rules are very complex, and I'll look to Rani, who's published articles on this. At the moment, the government funds Medicare for exome or whole genome sequencing. But the difficulty is that most laboratories aren't able to recover their costs from whole genome sequencing. So this health service may still need to pay a bit of a gap. Is that right? Is that fair? She's nodding, that's good. And also that to make it clear that Medicare funding is not available for everyone yet. We are doing a lot of work to try and change that. Amy will not. So currently Medicare funding covers trio, exome, usually, for children under the age of 10 who've got at least a moderate developmental delay or intellectual disability, or a combination of two congenital anomalies. Yes, correct?
I can speak a little bit more about that. The whole problem is that the whole genome... Sorry, Emma, I hope you don't mind.
I'd love you to, thank you.
So the problem is that whole genome costs about maybe 1.5 or 2 times that of whole exome. So we can get you a whole exome, but we can't yet get you a whole genome. There's also only one lab in Australia, and that's changing very quickly, who can do whole genome. But I really encourage you to try and speak to your treating teams, because most of us very hard to advocate to the bean counters that if you've had a whole exome and it's non-informative, that if there's a reason enough, we will try. We don't always get a yes, but certainly we try very hard to get a whole genome, which is, of course, is the best available diagnostic test.
It's the whole watermelon.
It's
yes,
the whole
watermelon. The whole
Yeah.
watermelon. Yeah. The moment we just can get a piece, inflation. So we do advocate to get a whole genome, but it's still expensive and not covered wholly by the rebate.
And so one of the things that the Centre for Research Excellence will try and do is funnel families who are undiagnosed into options for further sequencing on a research basis, so hopefully filling some of that gap. And part of that is collecting data to do exactly what Rani said, go to the bean counter. So for example, we know that if you do the best possible test as early as possible, that overall saves the health service the most money. So that's what we want, is enough support to be able to guide families through the option of having the best possible test as early as possible, because that's their best chance at getting that diagnosis in a timely manner.
Right.
I'll just add one more thing. Sorry, don't mean to take over, Em, but I have to be honest and say the yield of a whole genome over a whole exome is only 10 to 15% extra, okay? And that sometimes the feedback you may get is we will do the whole exome again, because most of that extra 10% is that new genes have been identified in the interim time since you had the exome, and it's still in the exome, it's still in the piece of the watermelon, but we just haven't been, we didn't know about that gene.
Because most of the watermelon, just really stretching this analogy, we don't know how to interpret it, okay? So almost 98% of our genome is between genes, and we think that that's important for turning on and off genes and orchestrating the incredible how we go from one cell to all of the cells in our bodies, but we don't yet know how to interpret most of that. So it will change. That's the other thing. It's money in the bank, the best possible test, and then we can keep going back and as we get better at looking at it.
Okay, we have another question. How do you balance giving a lot of information to people and healthcare practitioners or professionals, but not overwhelming them?
Yeah, so I didn't do a good job today, so I probably overwhelmed everyone. So really, I think that is a difference how we have to go in healthcare, because, believe it or not, I trained as a doctor for 7 years? I think I had a half a day session on communication skills. Okay, now that's gradually improving, but we're talking about incredibly complex information when you're probably the most scared you've ever been in your life. And we know that that is really difficult, and probably only about the first 5% of what we say will sink in that first consultation. So what that means is we need to have a health service that allows us to have an ongoing relationship with you so that you can come back and revisit things. And also we slow down. We don't go in with our own agenda of this is the 10 things I've got to get through in this appointment, but we take it at your pace. And we stop and we pause and we check, did you get that? And most people will nod. And so I was part of, when I was teaching the clinicians this morning, they were like, well, actually then a tip is to say, can you just tell back to me what I said? And that's not us being patronising, that's because we know that it's this incredibly complex information and we haven't done our job if you can't use that information to make health decisions and feel empowered. So I think it's really slowing things down. And I wasn't understanding it when I said we need more genetic counsellors, because they do this so much better than us doctors, and they have those amazing skills to pick up non-verbal cues. So can't hear any more right now, okay? So let's make another appointment, and maybe that's tomorrow, and then we pace that to go along. So that's a big change, I think.
Thank you. Well answered. Now, are there any other questions in the room? Otherwise, it is nearly 1 o'clock.
Just sort of following on from that answer, what is the team here doing to roll out ongoing patient care? Is there sort of any, I feel like sometimes the neurology department doesn't necessarily talk to the geneticist department, and from a practical patient care outcome, I think there should be some sort of ongoing support from the genetics team.
Absolutely, and I think that we're frustrated by it. And we're sort of pushed to be a diagnostic service, but actually we should be a rare disease service, and we should be, because this knowledge is only this big at the start of that journey, and then it's increasingly changing. So believe you me, we're having many discussions with our executive, because what we need are really a reference networks of centres of excellence across Australia, where there's neurologists and geneticists and CNCs and genetic counsellors and allied health specialists and psychologists all working in a team to have a flexible model of care. So when your child has a psychiatric issue, that's the focus. When your child has very severe epilepsy, the neurologist is more involved, and we're more flexible. So that's also that concept of a new model of care is something that this CRE will look at. But please, as I said, that's my email. Really love any contact, because we want to work with you, and as Rani mentioned before, the government listens more to families than they do to us.